Hi, my name's Scott the Miniature Maniac, and this is Moose the Cadillac. And today we're going to repaint this X-Wing to look like Poe's X-Wing from the new Star Wars series. And I'm definitely not trying to ride on the coattails of the new movie release at all for increased exposure. That's not me, no way. Even he knows I'm lying. What up, mini family? There's a little game called X-Wing, which happens to not be so little at all. In fact, it's quite popular. In 2017, it actually beat out Warhammer 40k in terms of sales at various local game stores and distributors as determined by the ICV2 survey. With the impending movie trilogy coming to a close this December, I thought we'd celebrate one of the franchise's more lovable characters, and that's Poe Dameron, by painting up his X-Wing. Let's give it a shot. We'll start with the X-Wing T70 model, as soon as I can get it out of the packaging. The wings have some motion to them, and I want to make sure that stays intact, so we won't be gluing anything down. We'll start by priming with the airbrush. I'll use the included clear acrylic stand and mask it off for priming and attach the whole assemblies to a piece of wood with some poster tack so it's easier to handle while painting. Once the surface was all uniform, I could see a few mold lines that I took care of with the sponge sanding stick. After that, I base coated the X-Wing again with an airbrush, but instead of using primer, used black paint. This can seem a little bit weird, but the reason I did it was because I wanted to base coat it in a black paint that I planned on using later when I make corrections, so it doesn't look like I used a different black paint than I had originally base coated with, in this case, black primer. Oftentimes, black paint on top of primer can look a little patchworky due to the difference in finishes. Next up, I started to base coat the orange accents. I used a color from scale 75 because it's nice and matte, which would offer up a good contrast when compared to the black of the ship, which was Citadel in this case, so nice and satin. This took a while, probably 7 to 8 thin coats of paint. Doing the stripes on the side of the X-Wing was probably the most challenging part. It's key that you have a nice sharp tip on your brush with a really stable grip. Rotate the brush at your wrist. Don't try to drag the brush down the side of the ship, moving your entire hand and forearm. That's far less stable. Let the angle of the side of the ship guide the bottom of the line, and for the top of the line, remember that you can come back with the black to straighten up the line should you need. Sometimes I go back and forth 3 or 4 times to get a nice straight line when I'm doing freehand like this. Once the orange was nice and opaque, I moved on to base coating the silver elements. I was using a 3D render from David Astley as my guide for where to put all my colors. Now on to the super tedious step of edge highlighting all the tiny panels. This ship is actually pretty small, smaller than I thought it would be, so edge highlighting took some patience. I started with a dark blue-gray and worked my way around the ship. Don't worry about making mistakes at this stage. We can fix it up with black paint at any point. Sometimes I immediately fix my mistakes, sometimes I wait until later and do them all at the same time. After the dark gray, I moved on to light gray, not covering entirely my previous edge highlight, but making sure a little bit sticks around. While I do that, let me tell you about today's sponsor, and that's me. Recently, I started selling my first ever product, which is a 75mm vampire miniature. And at the moment, it's all sold out, which is freaking awesome. Thank you to everyone who bought one and is supporting me in this endeavor. But I'm ordering more, and you can back order it right now to reserve yours as soon as it comes in. The design of the miniature is one that I've wanted from a vampire mini for a long time. Aristocratic, refined, and evil. Additionally, you can purchase the digital course along with the vampire for $10 off. The digital course is about 5 hours long and is a comprehensive educational experience. It goes over everything you need to know to paint the miniature like I did over the course of 77 different lessons, 67 of which are videos. Thanks for sponsoring this episode, Me. Now back to the video that Me is making. Okay, enough of that. Now we'll take some of the Abaddon black we base coated the whole ship in previously and clean up some of our lines. Sometimes two edges are so close together that I'll just paint the whole part gray and then separate them with a black line down the middle. Before getting too much farther, I want to wash my metallics. I'm going to try out a new product today, and that's the panel liner from Tamiya, which I believe is just an enamel wash. I'm going to use it on the very delicately detailed metallic parts, which a normal acrylic wash would totally punt on. We'll give it some time to dry and continue with the other parts of the miniature. At this stage, I decided the orange looked a little flat, so I took a brighter and more saturated orange and started to highlight those details. For flat stuff like this, it's kind of hard to know where the highlight would be and what it would look like, so I'll do a transition from front to back or back to front, whatever I'm feeling. This helps the panel look more interesting than a flat color. Not everything we paint needs to be photorealistic. Sometimes we can just make decisions that make our models look cooler too. Now on to the fun part, some paint chipping. With Abaddon black, we'll start to paint in some chips and scratches in our orange details, thinking about where they'd appear naturally. To me, it makes sense that the nicks and bangs would be on the fronts of wings when pieces of space debris collide with the ship as it zooms through outer space. Also, at some point I should recess shade the orange parts so we get some more definition in each panel. So let's do that with some dark brown. Next up, let's take some Vallejo metal color aluminum and paint in some scratches, working inside of the black chipping that we just added. Feel free to add some of the silver to the edges as well, as that's where a lot of wear and tear would occur naturally. While I had this silver out, I also highlighted parts of the ship that I had washed earlier. At this point, the enamel wash had been drying for close to 4 hours. It isn't fully cured, but I can paint on it without messing it up. I wanted to do even more highlighting with the orange after I got the silver in, so I mixed some white with my orange highlight color and started to edge highlight some of the panels and scratches to add more fun contrast to this tiny little ship. The order of operations that I'm following right now might seem a little bit strange, and that's because I'm painting on the fly. I don't have a paint plan that I've developed and honed over weeks of painting. This order might not be the most efficient. For a fun pop of color, I painted several of the what looks like buttons and LEDs on the ship with a teal color, which will be a nice temperature contrast to the orange accents all over the ship. I know it's not Star Wars canon, but I think it looks good. Speaking of Star Wars canon, have you noticed what color the jets on the back of this thing are? Hot pink, baby! Woo! But first, we need to do some modifications that should have likely been done earlier. First, let's make the jet holes a little bit bigger. Jet hole is a funny phrase. Next, let's fill them in mostly with epoxy sculpt. Whenever you do glowing recesses like skeleton eyes, or in this case jet holes, it's always easier if the depression is raised up a little bit because you don't have to reach your brush down into some deep dark pit. I'm going to try something new with my hot pink. I'll start by doing a yellow to white gradient where the center of the jet is the brightest, or in this case the whitest. Then I'll apply some Vallejo fluorescent pink over the gradient. My hope was that it would take on the gradient in a fun way, and if I'm being honest, this first test kind of failed, and I only started to look good after I nursed it a bit via adding more layers of hot pink and also some hot pink with white mixed in. Let's try it again on something a bit bigger, the windshield of the X-Wing. Again, I know this isn't what it's supposed to look like, but a black window would have been so boring. I started with a gradient of dark orange to white on each window, and once that was established, I hit it with hot pink, and after a few thin layers of that, it looked pretty cool. At the very least, this idea of starting with the yellow or orange gradient under hot pink is worth looking into more. I cleaned up the metal cockpit trim and then started on the last element, the base. I was inspired by an old painting Buddha video where Ben Comets painted the Millennium Falcon and did a space base, so I wanted to give it a shot. I started by sponging on what can only be described as space colors. A jade, a magenta, and a deep purple, and also some black. I did this pretty randomly. Sometimes it was thicker paint, sometimes thinner. Sometimes I applied it on wet paint. Sometimes the paint was already dried. Sometimes I mixed in white paint to get a brighter concentration. You get the idea. At various points, I glazed some of the tones on my palette to smooth the rough, spongy texture, to give the impression of space clouds and less space sponge. The word space is a very versatile descriptor I'm discovering. Once you've got an interesting palette of textures and colors, hit it with some white paint speckled on with a toothbrush, which makes really great stars. As a last step, we'll clean up the edges of the base rim and apply a gloss varnish to make these colors pop nicely, and we're done. I understand that painting a model in a game where one of the selling points is the models come pre-painted is a little strange, but it was really enjoyable. Putting a personal twist on a well-known model and mixing it up is always fun because seeing fanboys rage brings me pleasure, but also because it's my own personal version of the Star Wars universe that I grew up watching and loving. I hope you guys enjoyed seeing me paint Poe Dameron's X-Wing. I know I enjoyed doing it. If you guys like the channel and you want to support it, there's a variety of ways in which you can do that. Like aforementioned, you can pick up one of the vampires that I'm producing and also the digital course for it, which comes discounted when purchased in a bundle. You can buy merch like this t-shirt. You can support me on Patreon where you get access to things like my Discord server or the ability to suggest video topics and vote on ones that I do in the future. Or you can purchase items from my Amazon affiliate links like brushes that I use or other products that I use. Everything linked in the description below. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to...